I'd get it out of the way. I volunteered, and my local board, I was telling this gentleman here, I was from Gloversville, and they sent me to at that time the draft boards were sending the people who had problems. My problem was with my eyes, to a specialist in Schenectady. And after he examined my eyes, he said, "Young man, you'll never go in the Army." Well, I learned subsequently that military regulations can be changed, and they were changed regularly by the War Department. I never went overseas. I got my MA on June 1st. June 22nd, I was sworn in Utica in the induction center there. That was the 22nd. Then they put you on a two-week furlough, so you could straighten out your personal affairs. And in that period, I met my wife. Although I knew her before, we got into it in that short period because by a fluke she happened to be home on vacation. She's a registered nurse, or was a registered nurse. I'm her caregiver now, by the way. And so we went down to Camp Upton, which was a reception center, which I'm gonna. Give you some stuff here, which you can Xerox. Make sure I get it back.
Sure.
You promise that?
Yes. We can copy it here.
Well, this is a list from the Army of all the places in the country in 1943 that were taking men into the service. This had originally been classified, but then the classification was taken off. So they came from the historian in the military. I don't know what branch he was in, because everything's been reorganized. Anyway. I think the easiest way to do this is for me to read what I was writing.
Well, why don't I just want to do an introduction to the interview first.
Okay.
And then we can start from there.
Okay.
All right?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'll put the glass of water here.
Okay, put it on
All right.
here.
I'm just going to drop these books here.
Okay, this is, so I'll do an introduction, ask you a couple basic questions, and then we'll go from there.
Sure.
Some of them you've already answered. This is an interview with Herbert Engel, the Beltrone Center, Latham, New York. It is the 5th of August.
You're wrong there.
What is it?
Colonie.
Oh, Colonie? This is Colonie? Okay.
Our zip code, but here we have 12205, and we're in the that's an Albany zip code.
Oh, okay. It is the 5th of August, 2003, approximately 9:30 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. What is your full name, your date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My date of birth is June 20, 1918.
And where were you born?
In Gloversville.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I have my baccalaureate from what used to be New York State College for Teachers in Albany.
Okay.
And I got my master's from the University of Wisconsin in modern European history.
Now this was prior to entering service?
It was very prior, because I was reclassified immediately after Pearl Harbor. I was originally, as I think I was telling this gentleman here, in the first draft, and I was told, "Oh man, you'll never go in the service." Because my vision At that time was 20 over 400 and 20 over 500. I've since had cataract surgery, which was been a miracle. Okay, next question.
What was your, do you recall where you were and what your reaction was when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I wasn't surprised, but the way it was done did surprise me. I was in a private residence with a bunch of other college students, some of whom were going for their MD degree, and we were listening to the New York Philharmonic, which gives you a little bit of, and the program was interrupted, I think around in the early afternoon. Everybody said, "Oh shit." And of course, at that time, we didn't really realize the impact of all this until it began to dawn on us. Anyway, that's the impact.
Okay. Now you said you did enlist.
I know, I was drafted.
Oh, you were drafted. Okay.
Yeah, when Pearl Harbor happened, I was 4F at the time.
Oh, okay. You were inducted into the Army.
I was inducted into the Army.
Where did you go?
My draft board was in Utica. No, my draft board was Gloversville, or actually in Fulton County. But the swearing in was in Utica, in the Armory. And I got a perfunctory exam. They didn't check my eyes, all they did is look at my glasses and said 20 over 200, 20 over 200, non-combatant duty only. Which, I don't know if you're familiar with that classification or not. That later was changed. But at that time, I was non-combatant duty only. That was on the 22nd of June, and I think it was the 5th of July, I was on the train heading for Camp Upton. And I can read, I am a writer, by the way. I've had several books published. And my field changed during the war, mostly because of my military experience. Go ahead. I want to follow your lead.
Well, basically, we'd like you to tell your story from when you went to Upton, your training, and then how things changed for you in the military.
The local board, by the way, was 388. That was in Gloversville, and the chairman was a guy named Robert Colt, C-O-L-T. You want me to read this to you? Or would you rather take this and Xerox it and make sure you get it back to me?
Yes, we could. I think it would be better that we did that and then put it in your folder.
Save a lot of time.
Yeah. But if you could just, verbally tell us about your experiences when you went to Upton.
Yeah, what happened was, well, I went to Upton. I had a, I was introduced with a Sousa band, playing Sousa marches. We had a ride from, I would say, probably 8 o'clock in the morning from Fonda. By the time we got to Upton, it was late afternoon. And the train went directly to Upton. They went across Hell's Gate. Didn't go through the city. Well, it went through the city, but it didn't stop. And we came down there, and we had to spread our cheeks so they could examine our rear end. And then we were shunted into, I had an AJCT test. You know what that is? Okay. And ROA. You know what that is?
I don't think I know.
Radio operator aptitude test,
Okay.
which I didn't do too well in. Which I should have done better because I'm pretty good in music. And in any event, 4 o'clock the next morning, after we went through this whole thing, it was late in the evening before we got out of there, I was awakened and said, "You're on KP." I was in the service for 42 months. It's the only time I was on KP. And my job was bringing coal into the kitchen. And around 10 in the morning, I got a call. They said, "Engel, you're wanted in the orderly room." I didn't even know what the hell an orderly room was. And the guy said, "How would you like to stay right here at Upton?" And my wife, by the way, she was working in Brooklyn, at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, as an RN. She had just graduated as an RN. She was working there. I said, "That's great." So I went to a casual company. It was just called a casual company. And I was considered a casual. You don't understand what the term casual is?
No.
No, it means you didn't belong any place, really. But I was put through a training course with a few other people, including a guy who became one of my buddies there, William Griffith. Griffith became much more famous than I was. But he and I went through a training course on how to interview, because that's what I became. I became an interviewer. As the dog faces were coming through. We were in a casual company the guy who ran this was a sergeant from the regular army, had been down in the canal zone with the unlikely name of Sergeant Dragon. And he taught us every swear word under the sun. I can give you those if you want to hear them.
No, thanks.
You don't want to hear them? That's really the fun part. Ultimately, I was promoted and I was assigned to I got my green stripes. This was in the second Service Command, by the way. And we were called the eight balls. Are you familiar with the insignia for the Second Service Command?
No, I don't think so.
It's like two squares, one square like this and the other square like that.
Oh, yes, okay, I know which one.
It's blue on white.
Yes.
And we used to have people saluting us just for having those things on. But I was just a private. Ultimately, I was promoted and became a classifier. And the interview was done on a Form 20. Are you familiar with a Form 20?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give this to you. That was the instrument. Now, what I'm giving you here, you probably haven't. There isn't anybody else that's done any work on that. I was going to write an article for the American Legion magazine, but I've had too many other distractions, and so I never finished it. But the stuff I'm giving you here, which is headed up down the Mohawk Valley to Camp Upton, will tell you something about that.
So when you interviewed the soldiers, you
had imagine a large room with a relatively low ceiling, which was about the size of a big basketball court. And the men would come in, and there'd be guys standing as they came in, and they formed a line. They queued up, and then when an interviewer was finished with an interview, he says, they'd ship you down to be interviewed. Now, I had gone through this the night before. Remember that I told you I went through all this thing the night before. We were taught how to print. Everything had to be printed. And we were taught how to interview, get the information, and it was very important that we filled out the entire vita on the people who were coming through to make sure that they hadn't served jail time. And a lot of them did. So the interview was supposed to last about 5 to 7 minutes. And as you can see on that form, there's a number of things I want to talk about on this form. You see where it says main occupation, 13, and second best occupation, third best. Most people just had a main occupation. But there were people that had a number of skills. And all the rest of the stuff on the back, I have to look at this here just for a minute. Are you familiar with the term MOS?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something I can't find. I have a list of all the MOS. You have a list of all the MOSs?
Yes, I believe we do.
You do? Good.
Yes.
Yeah, ultimately I became a 275, which is a classification specialist. And the classification specialist was given the job of assigning an MOS. If you were, I think it was 591, which was basic. A lot of these numbers I can still remember. And which meant you could go anywhere. And sometimes, even though you may have had a good MOS, let's say as a baker, you would go somewhere else, depending on where the requisitions were. The requisitions were also coming into our unit from all over the country. But mostly, not everything. There was stuff from the West Coast, but most of the stuff was from the Middle Atlantic states down to the South. I remember Camp Butner, for example, tank destroyer corps. Anybody going there, he either hated his guts or he just was unfortunate. But that guided the requisitions, and particularly at that particular time. This was in 1942 now, when things were not looking too good. And remember, on June 22nd, 1941, which is just a year earlier, the Germans had invaded the Soviet Union, and they were down in the Caucasus about this time. And we weren't doing too well. And nobody knew what the hell was going to happen. By the way, I might add, there are a lot of people who are not familiar with the fact that Germany and Italy declared war on us on the day after Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
They say we should have gone. That was a tremendous break for the people who were strategizing where we were going to put our effort. So everything flowed from as the time went by, and I was there from early July until mid-March of the following year, making decisions. I could, after a while, and you can believe this or believe it or not, I could look at a guy and say where his level was, whether he was number 1, 2, 3 on the AGCT, just by looking at him. I mean, you see so many people coming through, hundreds, thousands. People who were distinguished in the public eye, like Joe Lewis and other people, we never got to see them. And we had a PR unit that was with us. And the guy who was the head of that was Jack Raymond. And Jack Raymond ultimately got a job with the New York Times, and he was their main reporter from the Balkans. He did a lot of work on Tito. That was well after the war. But we had some very, very bright people there, and we had people there who were literally dying to get in into the kind of a slot that I happened to fall into. I'll stop here and see what else.
No, that's fine.
Okay, now let me say something about the Form 20. And I got a lot of the material here from the outfit that I was going to write an article on the Form 20 from the McBee Company. The McBee Company was a union company based in, I think in Ohio, in Athens. And if you look at the form, I don't know if this copy will show this. No, this does not show that.
So after these, you filled these forms out, where did they go from there?
They went with a person. They went with each person.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of his service record.
Mm-hmm.
It was a key to his service record. And if you look at the form, these forms here that I gave you don't have holes around the outside.
Right.
Back then, were they referred to as a 201 file?
Well, the 201 file was the service record,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of which were destroyed later in a fire
Yeah.
in St. Louis or someplace like that. But this company did a lot of, they sent me all this material. Now here's the way it actually looked. Now, that hasn't been punched around the outside. Well, we had, after the MOS was done and signed, how did they get the people off the Form 20? They went around and they punched holes by hand. I have photographs of that. If I can find them here.
So these holes here relate to the different questions and how the person filled the questions out?
No. Oh,
okay.
It was only factual stuff, and it was the what was that stuff? I want to show you these photographs. And you can take that letter, that also, any of this stuff that I'm giving you, I want back, but you can make copies of it as you see fit. So we had a bunch of guys there who were not the brightest people in the world, but they followed instructions, and now they had with just a little hole puncher. And it's all hand work. After these were punched out, there were other people who had a needle. I call it a needle. It was about this long, with a piece of cork on the end of it, and they would run the needle through the hole, through the area that they were looking for. And the things that fell down, let's say they were looking for a particular number, would have the MOS that they were looking for. So that affected their assignment. If they had a high score in the ROA, they might have been sent down to Miami Beach to go into the Air Force and work as a radio operator. So this form was the key, and there was a lot of handwork. Now, have you ever heard about IBM? How come IBM didn't have this?
No.
You know, there's a book out on IBM and the Nazis.
Oh, I've seen it, but I've never read.
Yeah, I have a copy of it, but I'm not going to let you borrow it.
Yeah, that's okay.
IBM had a deal through a subsidiary in Germany. They had gone into the card sort, which was a lot more efficient. But for some political reason, this McVie outfit got the contract with the Army. And that's worthy of investigation as to how they got that. I was trying to find that out. I just ran into stone walls. But it was probably a political payoff for some reason, somebody back in 1940 or 41 made a decision. And you know, at that time it wasn't the Department of the Army, a Department of the Air Force, it was just the War Department. And the outfit, I think, was located in Athens, Ohio. But that card became, that was how you got assigned. Unless you had some political drag, and there was political drag on many assignments, which we got to see. But in any event, for some reason IBM did not get to, whether they bid on it or whether because of their close relationship with the Nazis, it's hard to tell. So the Army was stuck with a system here which was very inefficient because they used a lot of manpower. You had to have all these people interviewing. Well, you had to have the interview of some sort to get the data down. And then you had people punching these holes based on what the interviewer had put down, and what the classifier had assigned in terms of the MOS. By the way, officers also had an MOS. I don't have that list, but I wasn't interested in it, frankly. In any event, let me say something about my experience at Upton. We were working, normally we would be working from 7 in the morning, sometimes till 11 at night, with all these guys coming through, because the Army, they were desperate for people. They wanted to get them through. And big expansion at Upton. We had a bunch of jackasses. Our company commander was a guy who should have been court-martialed. He was playing with his 45, and he blew a hole in the side of the building. The thing went off. A guy by the name of Forenbach. He was from Long Island. We did not have any basic training until winter. And the basic training consisted of 4 weeks at Upton. And we went in there for, oh, by the way, I have to explain this. Have you read about the Nazi saboteurs that came ashore on Long Island?
From the submarines.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we had an alert one day. I don't know. I think it was in the fall, but I'm not sure. I didn't keep a diary or anything like that. But they handed each of us a shotgun. And there were, myself included, there were, I would say 90% of the guys had never seen a gun before, let alone a shotgun that was loaded. And we realized we were put on a truck, and we ran around for a couple hours, and finally they sent us back. But there was a lot of bitching about that. And they said, you guys have got to get some experience in using a gun. So we went out on the range and we were practicing with a shotgun. Never saw a rifle. Not at Upton. And from that experience, somebody said, these guys got to go through basic training. Supposing we have another alert or something like that. So we were, at the end of the second week, they said, hey, they're so goddamn busy. We got to take you back out of basic training. So we broke our basic training until much later, I think, end of January or early February, for the second 2 weeks, because you couldn't be promoted. We were promoted to private first class. By the way, the whole time I was at Upton, I never had more than 1 day off at a time. There was no furloughs. That was all taken care of. But I'm going to be candid with you. People in our group who rubbed the noses of the officers the wrong way would be picked up and they'd be shipped out. As a fact, a guy by the name of Jack Bodwin, who later became the #2 person in the Reader's Digest, I was a pretty good friend of his. And he was sent to the camp, to the tank destroyer corps down at Camp Butner. I remember that vividly, because he rubbed somebody the wrong way. And all these people were extremely bright. But there were also people there who had political drag, who had been former judges, or they had the one I gave you there with a hole. You'll see that the job description in there. No, that's not it.
There's a lawyer.
It's a lawyer,
This
yeah.
one, yeah.
His last name was Bruno, no relation to.
Mhm.
Most all these people are, I'm sure, are dead. In any event, there came a time when the War Department, in their wisdom, did away with non-combatant duty only. And that was probably in around February of '43. I'm not certain of that, but I'm guessing, because I was made full duty. And the reason I was made full duty was that somebody had invented glasses that you could wear under a gas mask. That was the only reason for people who were for non-combatant duty, because of their vision. So I knew I was going to be shipped out. I just didn't know when. And they were going to, the classification then had changed to limited service. And they were going to, all the jobs that we were doing were going to be filled by people with limited service. And so ultimately everybody was dispersed who were there for vision reasons. And I had the great fortune of being assigned to the Air Force in California, Hammer Field. Now I'm going to make, you're not going to believe some of this I'm going to tell you here. The Hammer Field was a rebel depot. And I never did KP there either, because they had a system there. They would rotate. The outgoing group would be doing the KP, or then the following week the incoming group would doing it. And I just missed it. And I was ultimately assigned to a fighter group, the 328th Fighter Group, which was headquartered at Hamilton Field, which is up by Santa Rosa. By the way, I never could get into officer candidate school because of my vision. That's the ironic thing. I passed everything else. But as soon as I went to this group, by the way, had 4 squadrons. And I was the 327th Squadron, which was assigned to San Francisco Municipal Airport in San Bruno. And as soon as I got there, they said, you never had any leave time, you never got... That was all... I was immediately promoted to a corporal and immediately promoted to a sergeant because the table of organization said that a classification specialist, I was a 275, was a buck sergeant. And that was my grade. And even after I changed my MOS, because of my really volunteer, I was able to do something other than what I was doing because there isn't a hell of a lot of classification that you do once you're in an established unit. In fact, they didn't even need classification specialists. But I did get involved in training. And that affected my career. Because later, subsequently, I got a job with the state when I got out. And ultimately, through the civil service system, I became director of public employee training for the state of New York. And also worked for Governor Thornburg in Pennsylvania. I was one of the biggies in the field. And that's beyond. But it just shows that life is a crapshoot. But my experience at camp at San Francisco Municipal Airport was, as far as I was concerned, was like a vacation. The only bad part about it was we had a lot of casualties from the fighter. So our group was training pilots before they went into combat down in New Guinea. And by the way, we were slated to go to New Guinea as a unit. We had all my shots and yellow fever and cholera and everything. And the Japanese were kind enough to start putting balloons over the Bay Area and up in Oregon. And they changed our mission. And we would do training and we would be guarding the Bay Area. And that we did. And then later, after that, because the Japanese were not successful in that endeavor, I think they killed 1 or 2 people up in Oregon or Washington. But those were, are you familiar with this? Mm-hmm. It wasn't much ado about nothing. Mm-hmm. But they didn't really know, and we didn't have much, they were expecting possibly the Japanese could invade the West Coast. Although, if you look in retrospect, it was, the Battle of Midway was the turning point of the war. One of the turning points. Everything happened in 42. In Stalingrad, 42, and El Alamein in North Africa.
Mm-hmm. What kind of aircraft did they use in the 327?
Bell Air Cobras, which was a machine, which is fired through the propeller. Mm-hmm. And those were made in Buffalo. Ultimately, we worked our way up. Well, let me say this. I got married during the war. Once we were told you're not going overseas, And I was still our place where we stayed was in Bruno, which is now a suburb of San Francisco. And when we were there, the whole mountainside, there was nothing there. It was fields. You could climb up there and get a tremendous view. Now that I've driven through that area, and there's nothing like rows of false teeth. Thousands and thousands of look-alike ticky-tacky houses, all of which was probably sell for $200,000, $300,000. Anyway, I got a furlough. I went home, got married, came back, and I had my wife lined up for a job in South San Francisco because she was a registered nurse, and they were looking desperately for registered nurses. We got to the base, and I said, "Hey, your unit is gone." I said, "Where are they going?" They had moved to Marysville. That was at Beale. But they were only there for a relatively short time. We went up, we got housing up. We were living in Marysville. My wife was working in the hospital there. But then they moved to Chico. And it was there that I changed my career. They were looking for somebody who could write and they could do intelligence work. And I put me down. So I became a 274, which is a public information specialist. And I had to go. Well, they had to do the FBI had to do a background check on me. I know they interviewed my neighbors in Gloversville and a whole bunch of other people. And I had free reign at Chico to... Chico, by the way, is where they made the movie Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. You ever see that movie? It's a great movie.
Yeah.
That was made at Bidwell Park, which is a fabulous place. Anyway, I was given free reign to... I could go anywhere there. By the way, at that point they had switched to P-38s, but they weren't doing any combat work. I should say, going back to Bruno, that a lot of guys got killed there just in training, because it was a very dangerous place. Because if you're familiar with the Bay Area, are you familiar at all?
No, I'm not.
Are you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an area you can almost slice it like this. There's fog on this side, and there's no fog on that side. And we were just where the airport is, and we're still there. It's expanded it. There was a little mountain right above that, and we had 7 guys go right into the mountain. You went up there and you're picking up pieces of lungs and things like that. That's all the family got back. And these guys were second lieutenants they were casuals in our place, and they were going to be shipped down had they lived. But almost every week there would be 1 or 2 casualties. It'd be interesting to know how many casualties we had that were not related to combat. I know there were a lot in practicing for the invasion in 1944 that died on English soil.
Mm-hmm.
And that was covered up for a long time. But going back to Chico, and half of my time I was the associate editor of the camp newspaper. I don't have that with my stuff here. I just brought the classification stuff because I thought that'd be the most interesting for you.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I was fortunate enough and I don't know how many other people, you're going to be interviewing people. Ask them how much life insurance they had. Were you in World War? You were probably in the Korean War.
No.
No? Vietnam?
No, I didn't serve.
You didn't serve?
Wayne's Vietnam.
You were in Vietnam. Yeah. Our unit, when I was going back to Upton, we had an insurance salesman who would put on a spiel to a bunch of people, maybe a couple hundred at a time, about the importance of taking out life insurance. You could have none. A lot of guys opted to have none. And this guy says to me, I got to know him fairly well, says, Herb, take out the largest amount you can get, which was $10,000. I had a boss in the state, by the way, who only took out $5,000. And I said, you schmuck. That policy I had for $10,000 is, the cash value right now is almost $60,000 because of the dividends have accumulated. And it's incredible. And every year you get your statement, and it goes up. It's based on actuarial consequences of how many people are still alive. It's mind-boggling. But a lot of guys, by the way, wouldn't take out much because they felt that was bad luck to do that. Here they're going in, they didn't know what's going to happen to them. Now, if I take out too much, I'll have to be killed. It's a dumb argument, but I'm telling you just the way it was. What else about the Upton experience? The most interesting is the sergeant and all the swear words he taught me. By the way, there was a lot of antagonism between the group. He had in his, we were there for what we would call rations and quarters. But he had no control over us in terms of our job, which was either interviewing or classifying people. So there was a lot of conflict between where we were there for rations and quarters. He said, you guys are a bunch of fuck-offs. You got it made. And we were actually working our ass off. Because you're doing this all day, particularly if you're doing interviewing. Classifying was simpler. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was we used the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And you ought to get a copy of that. I don't have a copy, and a lot of the stuff I had, I gave to the State University, which was a successor of the New York State College for Teachers. But you can probably get that from the Department of Labor, and you should have a copy of it. Because sometimes there'd be people with occupations that they didn't, but the reason you had that was everything was coded in there. Now those codes were not used by the military except in unusual circumstances. If you had in fact, we used to we had a Christmas party one year. And somebody put on a skit where I'm the interviewer and you're the person, and I say, what did you do? And you say, not much. Well, it says here that you lived out in the country. Yeah, I was a farmer. And then, oh, did you operate a tractor? Oh yeah, I operated a tractor, and I could tear the whole thing down and put it back together. And immediately you start thinking, gee, that's great. What else did you do? He says, well, I had a hobby. I used to fly planes. And this guy drags this thing on. He had all kinds of technical skills, but to get that information out of the person was a skill in itself. You know, he had, on the other hand, you also had people come in and say, "What did you do between these years?" He said, "Well, I was up at Dannemora," and you'd have that also. So you know, you got to see human nature, and in a situation which was very stressful. It was stressful, particularly for the people being interviewed, because they had no idea what the hell was happening. And most of them didn't have a clue about their Army General Classification test, whether that was valid or not. But speaking as somebody who used to teach, that's dubious. But people's lives ultimately were managed on the basis of that information, because that was the best thing they had at that time. But the Dictionary of Occupational Titles is important. It's a book about this thick, with a black cover, published by the U.S. Labor Department. And you would be able to find obscure. You couldn't get an MOS. You'd have to fudge your MOSs, because everybody had to fit into a number, 3-digit number. And I have that somewhere, but I can't find the damn thing. Now, going back to Chico now, I will take you back now from Upton, Hammerfield. Hammerfield, by the way, was in Fresno. I was only there for about a month. That was just a replacement depot for the Air Force. That's all they did. There were people coming in there from all over the country. And it's not there anymore, as far as I know, because we made a trip around. I have 5 kids. When we had 4, we made a 10,000-mile trip around the country, and to show the kids where we had been during the war. My wife, by the way, at Chico, got a job with the Air Force in the hospital, and she had the civilian rank that was equivalent to a first lieutenant. So she'd be getting invited to all the officer clubs, and she'd take me along. I was the only non-com there. We were at Chico when Roosevelt died.
What kind of reaction did you have to that? Do you recall?
Everybody was very sad. And it was great mourning, and throughout there might have been people who were saying, by the way, I didn't vote for Roosevelt. I thought he was not capable of carrying on. But in fact, I also have a newspaper on my memorabilia. And it says, "Truman loses."
Yes. Do we?
That was put out by the local Chico paper. We lived off the base in Chico, and I take the bus in every morning and go to work.
Now, were you there when VE Day was?
No, I wasn't. There's more to come.
Okay.
I should add that I would have to produce a record each month of problems, advances, as I put them together in a formal report. And that would go to 4th Air Force headquarters, which was in Hamilton Field. So they would take out a basic trainer, put me in that, and they'd ferry me over. That was the first time I had flown. And occasionally you'd have a taxi driver up there who'd say, "Hey, Herb, look down there. There's a fire down there." And he goes, Anyway, I was also writing for the Chico newspaper, the Chico Flyer. And I would do interviews and do some editing, and it was a pretty good. And if you really need a copy of that, I can go through my memorabilia, because we're in the process very slowly because my wife is not healthy, and I need her in on this. I can give you a copy of that. Anyway, at that point, I had a buddy working in personnel who died recently. His name was Bob Friend. He worked in the Department of Interior, and he went back to that job. His widow's still around. And he came to me one day, he said, "Hey, Herb, how'd you like to switch jobs? They're looking for people to become occupational counselors." He said, "The only drawback is that you may have to stay in longer than anybody else." I said, "Well, where's the school on this? They have to train you." I was like, my interviewing background was helpful. He said, "Well, the school is in San Antonio, Texas." So I said, "All right, put me down." And sure enough, I got a call. Up the school had moved to Fort Story, Virginia. So we were at Virginia Beach when the war ended. Actually, I was taking a course in occupational counseling. And we lived on the beach. And there were a lot of, a good friend of mine who he was deputy budget director in New York State, Bob Herman, taught at Union College. I taught at Union College too. And once my career changed, we had some of the top-notch people in the country teaching us how, because we had people who had physical problems and people who had psychoneurotic problems. And you were trying to help them adjust. And this was in a convalescent hospital at Virginia Beach. Now, the Fort Story, are you familiar with that area at all?
No.
I'll go down there. It's a great area. For a while, we lived in Newport News. But later, we were on a trailer, which was policed by German POWs. And that's where I ended my career.
Were you there when the bombs were dropped on Japan? What was your reaction to that?
What was my reaction? I don't know. I don't think I had any real reaction, because I didn't realize the significance of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Except that the war ended very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember that the war in Germany ended earlier.
Yes, yes.
And there was great fear that we would take a lot of casualties if we were to invade.
Right.
In retrospect, I think it was probably the right thing to do. Given the knowledge that we had of what the hell we were, it was like Pandora's box. Once you opened it up, that's where we are today.
Yeah.
With North Korea.
When you left the service, did you make use of the GI Bill at all?
Just to buy a house.
How about the 52-20 club?
What the hell is that?
52 weeks, you received $20. It was kind of an
never,
unemployment
never.
insurance. Okay. How do you think your time in the service affected your life?
Oh, it
I
affected
think you kind of told us a little bit.
Yeah, it affected it tremendously because I got a job in the Labor Department. I was an on-the-job training program evaluator, which related to part of the GI Bill. People who went in either to apprenticeship or into job training didn't get their part of their salary was reimbursed. We had employers that looked for kickbacks, but and ultimately I became the head of that unit, and later I switched over to civil service and became a trainer.
Okay. Okay, well, thank
And
you.
I should fill out that I did later on. As I say, I was in charge of all training in the state of New York, everything, in all departments. I organized the New York State Training Council. I worked part-time for Union College, College of St. Rose, the graduate school at Albany, where I taught a course in personnel management.